The year is 1814, and you are a Londoner minding your own business when all of a sudden the ground begins to shake and the air grows thick with the scent of hops and barley. You look over to see the source of the commotion, a nearby brewery whose giant vats have just burst, unleashing a tidal wave of beer that is about to crash into your neighborhood. You immediately make a run for the hills, dodging overturned carts and startled animals as you desperately try to get out of the flood's path. But there is simply no escape. And before long, you are utterly soaked in beer. The air grows thick with foam as frothy waves rush down the streets, rising up to your knees, then your waist, and finally your chest. Your house collapses around you, and you struggle to keep your head above the beer until it is all over, and you are left choking on the bitter liquid as the world around you becomes a foamy sea of amber. Congratulations. You have drowned in a literal beer flood. On October 17, 1814, the world's worst case of beer goggles turned into the worst case of beer flood when two vats at a London brewery catastrophically burst, creating a foamy wave that injured at least 14 people and killed at least 8. Here is the story of how London drowned in beer. Our story begins on September 17, 1814, when an English brewer named John Porter was busy preparing his wares for the upcoming October Beer Festival. Known as one of England's most beloved festivals, the week-long Oktoberfest would be held annually throughout London and feature dozens of different breweries selling their finest ales. To prepare, John had begun filling up his 3 massive vats in his yard off the Whitechapel Road. Standing 16 feet tall, each one could hold around 20,000 gallons of beer, enough to supply hundreds of patrons with their favorite brews. While filling the vats, however, John noticed that the middle one was leaking. He immediately went to work patching the hole with lead, a common practice at the time. Vats were typically made of wood and often sprung leaks. However, he may have been in a bit too much of a hurry. By Monday, October, the repairs were complete and the vats were full. Excited to show off his wares at the upcoming festival, John ordered his workers to cover the vats with lids and begin transferring the beer into barrels so he could take them to market. And this is where our story takes a turn for the worse. As the workers began tapping into the first vat, John went to check on the second one. As he approached, he noticed that the airlock, a device used to allow carbon dioxide to escape while keeping contaminants out, was blocked. Concerned that pressure might build up inside the vat and cause it to explode, John called for help and ordered the workers to stop tapping the vats until they could figure out what to do next. As the workers gathered around the second vat, discussing what to do, a loud crack echoed across the yard. Everyone looked over to see that the south side of the second vat had split open, releasing a torrent of pressure and sending John and his workers scrambling for safety. As the vat continued to split, the men watched in horror as the entire structure collapsed, unleashing over 300,000 gallons of beer in a massive wave that barreled toward them. Screaming in terror, the men ran for the hills, desperately trying to escape the oncoming wave. However, the wall protecting the yard was only 10 feet tall, which was no match for the frothy wave of ale that was about to crash into it. One by one, the boards splintered and fell away as the wave surged forward. In the distance, Londoners heard a loud roar that sounded like thunder. Many assumed that perhaps a cannon had gone off prematurely. However, they would soon find out that this was no explosion, but something far more disgusting. The wave crashed through the weak wall, spilling out into the streets of London. People screamed and scattered as the giant wave came barreling toward them. Some tried to flee, but the wave was far too fast, and soon knocked them off their feet. Others attempted to outrun the wave by taking shelter in their homes, but the deluge forced its way in, flooding their rooms and sweeping everything before it. The wave surged through the streets, knocking people off their feet and filling their mouths with bitter beer. Many who had fallen were trapped under the weight of barrels and crates that the wave had swept up along the way. Others were trapped in their homes as the wave filled their rooms, climbing higher and higher until their ceilings caved in. The wave traveled over a mile through the streets, overflowing the gutters and flooding every room that stood in its path. Among the victims was a family of 6 who had been asleep in their home when the wave crashed through the walls, sweeping them out into the flood. Their bodies were later found by firefighters, piled together in the corner of the flooded room. Although their home had been destroyed, many Londoners still tried to salvage whatever they could from the wreckage. For some, this meant searching through the debris for valuable items that the flood had dislodged. For others, it meant grabbing a cup and trying to enjoy the free beer that was literally flowing through the streets. One eyewitness later recounted what he had seen that day, writing, "The people in the different houses along the road filled up their cellars, and in some instances their teapots and coffee pots with the beer, which I am told by those who saw it, flowed as regular as water from a tap. It was a most extraordinary and disgusting spectacle." In the aftermath, the floodwaters receded, and Londoners emerged from their homes, covered in beer from head to toe. They stumbled around, dazed and confused, unsure of what to do next. Many complained that the beer had ruined their clothing and made them sick to their stomachs. Still, some were lucky. Others were less fortunate. By the time the sun set that evening, at least 8 people were confirmed dead, including 3 children. Others were reported missing, and it was assumed that they had perished in the flood as well. Homes and businesses were completely destroyed, their walls washed away by the torrent of beer. Barrels and crates lay strewn across the streets, blocking the roads and littering the ground. The stench of stale beer hung heavy in the air, making it difficult for people to go about their daily lives. It was clear that the damage caused by the flood was extensive. With so many homes destroyed and people left without food or shelter, Londoners knew that they needed to come together if they were going to recover from this disaster. In the aftermath, authorities struggled to determine who would pay for the damages caused by the flood. Porter claimed that he had taken out insurance on the contents of the brewery, but that it did not cover damage to buildings or other structures. He also said that he had offered to pay for the damages out of his own pocket, but that the owners of the damaged buildings had refused his offer. As a result, many of the victims of the flood were left without any compensation for their losses. The disaster caused quite a stir among Londoners who were still reeling from the recent Napoleonic Wars. Some blamed the government for not doing more to protect them from the disaster. Others blamed the brewery for not taking proper precautions. Still, others simply shook their heads in disbelief at the senseless loss of life and property. Years later, people would still talk about the Great Beer Flood of 1814, and for good reason. It was one of the most bizarre disasters in London's history. Not only had a brewery literally burst, killing several people and injuring many others, but the flood had also caused widespread damage to property and businesses. It was a disaster that could have been avoided if simple precautions had been taken. And it was a reminder of the importance of being prepared for anything. Today, the site of the disaster is marked by a plaque that reads, "Here on October 17, 1814, 2 vats of beer from this brewery burst, causing the most disastrous flood in London's history. The wave of beer and froth spread through the streets, killing 8 people and injuring many more. Homes and businesses were destroyed and thousands of barrels of beer were spilled." So remember, my friends, no matter how careful you are, sometimes disaster can strike without warning. All you can do is hope that when it does, you're not caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. Alright, now here's a question for you. What do you think would be the best way to survive a beer flood? Let me know in the comments below. And while you're down there, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you do not miss out on any of my future videos. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.